They said he believed in nothing, that death to him was a blank screen. But in a private session, sealed, unpublished, and buried in an academic archive for over a decade, Stephen Hawking said something else, something that didn't fit the narrative. Not about black holes, but about what happens to you. Because in the last days of his life, he began to speak about patterns that survive death. And what he saw in those final patterns terrified him. He never believed in a soul, not in the way religion described it, not in the way philosophy romanticized it. To the world, Stephen Hawking was the embodiment of pure rationalism, a man of mathematics, particles, and probability curves. But behind closed doors, especially in the last years of his life, that certainty began to fray. It started with time. He'd spent his career unraveling it, treating time not as a flowing river, but as a spatial dimension, something that could bend, twist, even stop. But as his condition worsened and his physical limits grew sharper, he began to look at time differently. Not as a line, but a mirror. In 2017, during a series of off-record interviews conducted at his Cambridge residence, Hawking allowed a select group of physicists and one philosopher to pose questions not about cosmology, but about consciousness. The recordings were never released. What little has leaked comes from transcribed notes passed between academic circles, notes dismissed by official institutions as unverified and not reflective of Hawking's published views. But what if they weren't meant to be? In one of those suppressed sessions, Hawking was asked directly about death, about whether awareness ends. His response was clinical, but with a strange edge. He described death not as cessation, but as phase decoherence. Not an end, a transfer. He spoke about the possibility that information, the fundamental substrate of identity, might not be destroyed, even after neurological shutdown. Instead, it might dissipate through dimensional curvature. Those weren't the words of a spiritualist, but they weren't empty either. Around the same time, Hawking's private papers began to reflect an unusual shift. Mixed in with gravitational equations and entropy models were handwritten sketches, diagrams mapping something he called identity persistence vectors. These weren't scientific terms. They resembled something closer to metaphysics. And then something changed. Months before his death in March 2018, a previously planned paper titled The End of Eternity was pulled from circulation. The abstract had already been accepted. Its topic was said to be the final fate of the universe. But internal sources suggest the actual draft began to explore something else entirely, whether entropy itself could carry imprints of consciousness. A few weeks later, during what would be one of his final private discussions, he spoke just one line when asked what he believed truly survived. Not the self, but the symmetry. That recording was cut short. No further clarification was ever given. But taken together, the withheld paper, the diagrams, the final notes, a pattern emerges. A man who once viewed death as emptiness began to describe structure, transfer, design, and from that silence, 5 revelations began to surface. Not about space, about you. And the strange possibility that what we call the soul might be written into the code of time itself. Stephen Hawking's final years were marked by an obsession that surprised even his closest colleagues. After decades of unlocking secrets of black holes and the universe's origin, he turned his attention inward, to the most personal mystery of all. what happens to us when we die. For most, death is the ultimate erasure, a clean break where consciousness ceases and identity dissolves. But Hawking challenged that assumption. He proposed something radical. Identity might not vanish at death, but instead become encoded into the very fabric of space-time. It was a theory grounded not in religion or mysticism, but in physics itself. He called this phenomenon informational residue. The idea was that every memory, every thought, every quiver of consciousness leaves behind a pattern, recursive memory functions that persist beyond the physical death of the body. These are not biological traces trapped in neurons, but non-biological structures woven into the universe's underlying code. To understand this, consider how information behaves in physics. Hawking's earlier work on black holes revealed a puzzle. When something falls into a black hole, it seemed its information was destroyed. But laws of quantum mechanics say information cannot be lost. This paradox became known as the black hole information problem, and Hawking devoted much of his life grappling with it. His late-stage theory applied this insight to human consciousness itself. If black holes don't destroy information but transform and scatter it, why would the death of a human body be any different? Consciousness, in this view, is a complex pattern of information, encoded not just biologically, but at a universal quantum level. Hawking began mapping what he called recursive memory functions, patterns of data that reflect the totality of one's identity, projected onto the space-time continuum. These functions do not disappear. Instead, they disperse, becoming part of the cosmic fabric, much like the Hawking radiation his theories predicted would leak from black holes. Evidence of this concept leaked in unexpected ways. A classified slide from a 2017 scientific conference, unearthed by whistleblowers, illustrated human memory collapse in an unsettling diagram. It tracked how the brain's biological memory fades after death, but concluded with a phrase that struck researchers silent. Not lost, just displaced. This line, simple yet profound, suggests that who we are doesn't vanish. It migrates, becoming something else, somewhere else. It reframes death as less an end and more a transformation of identity into a different informational state. What does this mean for the soul or for consciousness? It challenges centuries of thinking that separate mind and matter, body and spirit. Instead, it implies that the self is not a fixed entity housed in the brain, but a transferable waveform, a code encoded, copied, and scattered throughout the universe. It also raises a chilling question. If everything that defines you, your memories, your experiences, your personality, is still encoded somewhere beyond physical death, would you seek it out? Would you try to trace your existence through this cosmic code? But if this code exists, where is it? How could it be accessed? And what if this informational residue isn't passive? What if it interacts with the universe, influencing reality in ways we don't yet understand? Hawking's unpublished notes hint at deeper mysteries. He speculated that this code could explain phenomena that science struggles with: near-death experiences, shared memories, even certain psychic occurrences. In this framework, consciousness is not confined by biology, but is a fundamental aspect of the universe, encoded in information patterns that transcend space and time. The implications are staggering. It means death is not a sudden blackout, but a gradual process of frequency migration, our identity transforming from one form to another. It opens the possibility that consciousness can be preserved, transformed, or even recovered in ways modern science has barely begun to explore. Yet, Hawking never claimed to have all the answers. His final work was more a starting point than a conclusion, a challenge to rethink what we consider reality, identity, and the nature of death itself. This understanding forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about who we really are. Are we merely flesh and neurons? Or are we something more? Patterns of information that resonate through the cosmos, waiting to be recognized or decoded. And if that's true, what does it mean for our fear of death? What does it mean for the way we live our lives, knowing that parts of us might never truly be lost? Stephen Hawking's theory of informational residue is more than a scientific curiosity. It is an invitation to question what identity really means, to explore the boundaries of life and death, and to reconsider the possibility that the code of our existence endures long after our bodies have faded. So, here's the question you must ask yourself. If everything you are is still encoded somewhere, scattered across the universe's fabric, if your memories, your essence, your very consciousness persists beyond death, would you go looking? Would you dare to decode the cosmic memory of your own being? If the essence of who we are, the very information that defines our identity, can persist beyond the body, encoded into the fabric of space-time itself, then our understanding of time becomes crucial. Stephen Hawking's groundbreaking work on the nature of time challenges the common notion that time is a straight arrow, flowing steadily from past to future. Instead, his research reveals a far stranger possibility. Time may loop, fold, and twist back on itself in ways that defy linear logic. This realization pushed Hawking to explore concepts that went beyond physics and into the realm of identity and consciousness. He proposed the idea of self-looping identity structures, echoes of our consciousness trapped within recursive folds of time. According to this vision, what we typically think of as the afterlife may not be a mystical place or a spiritual realm, but a state of existence caught in a loop outside of linear causality. To grasp this, imagine time not as a straight line, but as a ribbon folded back on itself. The past and future are not fixed points, but can overlap, interact, and fold into one another. In this strange topology, a version of ourselves, our after-self, could be replaying memories, emotions, and consciousness, endlessly folded within these temporal creases. Hawking hinted at this idea in a rarely seen, unsent letter to his longtime collaborator Kip Thorne. In this letter, he included a cryptic sketch labeled, "The soul, if it exists, rides the fold." The phrase is simple, yet loaded with meaning. It suggests that consciousness might navigate these folds of time, looping through them like a traveler caught in an endless corridor. The soul is not a separate ethereal entity, but a pattern of information moving through these temporal loops. What does this mean for us? It forces us to reconsider what it means to die. Death is no longer a definitive end, but a transition into a recursive loop where parts of our identity continue to exist, replaying, reflecting, and persisting beyond the decay of the physical brain. Your memories, your emotions, your sense of self may not be fading irretrievably into the past. Instead, they might be waiting, folded into your future, suspended in time. This concept also challenges the common human experience of time and memory. We remember the past, but cannot see the future. Yet, if identity exists in a looped structure of time, then the past and future are intertwined. Our consciousness may extend forward into moments we have yet to experience, folding back into itself in ways we cannot yet perceive. This idea pushes us to ask, what if the memories you think are gone are simply waiting in a different fold of time, waiting for your after-self to encounter them again? Such a model explains many mysteries that traditional linear time fails to address. It accounts for déjà vu, for visions of possible futures, and for reports of consciousness existing beyond physical death. Instead of vanishing, our identity simply transitions into a looped state, replaying its own informational pattern in time's folds. This also carries profound philosophical implications. If our consciousness is trapped in these loops, then the very concept of free will and linear progression might be an illusion. Our identity may be caught in recursive patterns, repeating until some unknown condition is met, or until the loop is broken. This raises difficult questions. Are we truly moving forward in life, or are we simply retracing patterns encoded deep within the folds of time? Hawking's insight reframes death not as an abrupt finality, but as an engineered fold, an echo of self looping through the cosmos. He doesn't suggest mysticism or religious dogma, but uses the language of physics and topology to map consciousness beyond the grave. This scientific approach to the afterlife challenges both believers and skeptics, forcing a confrontation with the unknown on its own terms. The breadcrumb to this revelation appears in a classified document from a 2017 physics conference, which included a model of human memory collapse ending with a chilling phrase, "Not lost, just displaced." This suggests that what we perceive as memory loss or death is actually a displacement of identity into different temporal folds. Now, you are faced with a choice. Do you accept the idea that your memories and identity might still exist somewhere beyond this moment, trapped in a fold of time? If so, would you seek to understand this after-self? Would you look beyond the linear, tangible world into these recursive corridors of time, where the soul, or what science might call the informational pattern, rides the fold? This is not a comforting conclusion. It implies that our identity may be caught in an infinite echo chamber, endlessly looping without release or resolution. But it also offers a new framework to understand consciousness, death, and perhaps the soul, not as mystical phenomena, but as fundamental features of the universe's temporal architecture. Ultimately, this revelation forces us to reconsider what it means to be alive and what it means to continue beyond life. Stephen Hawking's final words were not about endings, but about the strange, looping corridors of time where identity persists. The afterlife is no longer a distant spiritual hope or a fearful unknown. It is a recursive fold of time itself, carrying the echoes of ourselves long after our bodies have fallen away. We left off considering the idea that identity may not move linearly through time, but instead loop recursively within folds of space-time. This alone challenges everything we believe about memory, death, and the persistence of self. But Stephen Hawking's exploration didn't stop there. His later work plunged even deeper into the mystery of consciousness, proposing a radical rethinking not just of time, but of the very origin of our conscious experience. For centuries, the dominant view has been simple. Consciousness arises from the brain's physical processes. The firing of neurons, the chemical reactions, the intricate web of connections. These are what produce the mind, personality, and sense of self. When the brain dies, so goes the person. Hawking began to question this assumption. influenced by advances in quantum theory and information science. He speculated that consciousness might not be generated in the brain at all. Instead, it may be something non-local, existing outside the brain but interfacing with it, much like software runs on hardware. In this model, the brain is not the origin of consciousness, but a receiver or processor, a complex antenna tuned to pick up a deeper, more fundamental informational field. Consciousness itself would be a form of computation that transcends the physical body, embedded in the quantum fabric of reality. The mind doesn't emerge from the neurons, it interacts with them. This implies a staggering shift in how we view life and death. If consciousness is not localized in the brain, then death doesn't mean annihilation of the self. Rather, death is the severing of the connection between the consciousness, this non-local computation, and the physical body. The receiver shuts down, but the signal persists. A lost page from Hawking's 2016 notebook captures this insight in a haunting phrase. Not created here, only rendered here. The mind, he suggested, is not created by the brain but merely rendered or expressed through it. When the body ends, the rendering stops. But the underlying computation continues somewhere else, beyond our current understanding. Consider the implications. If your consciousness isn't generated by your body, then it cannot be destroyed by your body's death. The self is more than flesh and neurons. It is a non-local computation, a quantum informational process woven into the very fabric of space-time. This perspective helps explain many puzzling phenomena that materialist science struggles with: near-death experiences, memories beyond brain function, and the resilience of identity after severe brain trauma. It also offers a plausible scientific framework for what we've long called the soul, not as a mystical, unprovable spirit, but as an informational pattern existing independently of the body. The idea that consciousness is non-local aligns with some interpretations of quantum physics, which reveal a universe that is deeply interconnected, where particles can be entangled across vast distances and information may not be confined to physical boundaries. Hawking's insight was to bridge these ideas to the mystery of self and death, suggesting consciousness itself may be part of this quantum web. But this also raises a profound, unsettling question. If your mind isn't truly in your body, then what happens when your body stops functioning? Does the consciousness simply switch off? Or does it continue in some other form or dimension, no longer bound by the physical constraints of biology? This question isn't just academic or metaphysical. It strikes at the heart of human experience. It asks us to reconsider what it means to be alive, what it means to die, and what might lie beyond. And yet, this model offers no easy comforts. It doesn't guarantee blissful afterlife or reincarnation. Instead, it describes a process of disconnection, the severing of the signal and the receiver. What happens to the consciousness, then, is a mystery still beyond our reach. But it may well be that this informational self persists in ways that science is only beginning to glimpse. This leads us to a sobering reflection. If your mind is not in your body, then death is not extinction but transition, a phase shift in the computational pattern of your consciousness. The body dies, the rendering ends, but the computation, the you at its core, might still exist somewhere beyond our perception. Such a revelation reframes the finality of death into a question of connection rather than annihilation. It suggests that the essence of self is a complex computation not born from biology, but interfacing with it. And the end of life is not the end of that computation, only the end of its expression through physical form. The breadcrumb embedded in Hawking's notebooks hints at something more. That this non-local consciousness is not created by our brains, but belongs to a broader universal informational system. We are nodes, receivers in a cosmic network far larger than we can imagine. This reframing also calls into question much of how we currently understand identity, memory, and the self. What we call mind may be just a shadow of a deeper quantum informational process, a signal filtered through the imperfect receiver of the brain. And death is simply the loss of that signal's interface. So now, ask yourself, if your mind isn't truly in your body, what happens when your body ends? Does your consciousness simply cease, or does it continue, disconnected but still real, somewhere beyond the veil of physical life? This is not just science or philosophy. It is a challenge to everything we believe about life and death. We just explored the startling idea that consciousness may not be generated inside the brain, but is instead a form of non-local computation, temporarily rendered through the body's physical processes. Death, in this framework, doesn't erase the self. It severs the connection between the consciousness and its physical receiver. But what if this severing isn't always clean? What if some fragments of consciousness don't fully detach, lingering instead in a strange state between life and death? This brings us to one of Stephen Hawking's most unsettling late-stage hypotheses, what he referred to as residual observers. These aren't ghosts in the traditional sense, nor souls trapped by spiritual forces. Instead, they are theoretical forms of awareness left behind in the subtle quantum interference fields that permeate reality. To understand this, consider the principle of quantum interference. The way particles like electrons can exist in multiple states or locations simultaneously, their waves overlapping and influencing each other. Hawking speculated that consciousness itself, being a quantum informational process, might sometimes leave behind incomplete or fragmented fields of awareness when disrupted abruptly, especially during traumatic deaths, sudden neurological trauma, or intense psychological shock. In these cases, the transition from life to death isn't smooth or complete. Instead, part of the consciousness gets caught in what might be called a quantum limbo, a place of perceptual uncertainty where these residual fields hover, not fully dissipated, but not integrated either. These are what Hawking termed interference entities, or residual observers. Unlike the traditional notion of a ghost tied to a location or object, these entities exist as subtle informational patterns embedded in the interference between quantum states. They don't possess full agency or continuous experience like a living mind, but they may carry fragments of memory, awareness, or emotion. Hawking's notes suggest these residual observers could be responsible for many unexplained phenomena: feelings of presence when alone, inexplicable sensations of being watched, or even certain forms of paranormal experience that elude physical explanation. In a restricted email exchange with close colleagues, he cryptically warned of what listens when no one speaks. This phrase hints at these residual awareness fields silently observing without interacting, existing as informational echoes caught in the quantum weave of reality. This concept reframes many encounters with the unseen as not spiritual or supernatural, but as byproducts of physical and quantum processes. It challenges the comforting belief that consciousness either fully persists or fully ends, proposing instead that fragments of identity may endure in a state of limbo, influencing the world subtly, but never fully alive. The reflection this evokes is chilling. Have you ever felt in the stillness of your mind that something unseen was watching your thoughts? That fleeting sensation, often dismissed as paranoia or imagination, may be a residual observer, an informational fragment left behind by a consciousness that could not fully transition. Imagine these entities as faint ripples on the edge of perception, quantum shadows cast by lives interrupted too suddenly to complete their computational migration. They are neither alive nor truly dead, trapped in the interference patterns of reality itself. This hypothesis also forces us to confront the fragility of the transition between life and death. The idealized notion of a smooth passage, or a clean severing of consciousness, is complicated by the possibility that traumatic or sudden death leaves behind fragmented awareness, stray informational waves lingering in the quantum fabric. If this is true, then death is not a singular event, but a complex process with varying degrees of completeness. Some consciousnesses successfully detach and transition, while others become stuck in this interference field, existing as residual echoes. This could also explain the profound psychological impact of traumatic loss, hauntings, or feelings of unease in places where violent or sudden deaths occurred, rather than spirits clinging to grudges or unresolved business. These interference entities might be quantum remnants, informational debris caught in the overlapping waves of existence. What does this mean for us as living beings? It suggests that our consciousness is more delicate and interconnected with the fabric of space-time than we imagined. The way we die, how sudden, how traumatic, could determine whether our informational pattern fully migrates or partially remains behind as an interference entity. This raises difficult questions about the ethics of life and death, medical interventions, and even how we understand trauma. Could our efforts to prolong or hasten death affect the nature of this transition? Could unresolved mental or emotional states contribute to incomplete detachment? It also challenges us to rethink the boundaries of self and other. If fragments of consciousness remain as interference patterns, then the world around us might be more alive with subtle awareness than we suspect. Yet, despite the eeriness of this idea, it offers no simple answers. These residual observers don't speak, don't communicate in ways we recognize, and don't possess the fullness of life. They are informational ghosts in the quantum machine, silent watchers of the living. The breadcrumb Hawking left is both haunting and cryptic. These fields of residual awareness exist in the quiet interference patterns of reality, listening when no one else does. So reflect on this. Have you ever sensed an unseen presence, felt watched when utterly alone, or experienced that subtle, inexplicable shiver down your spine, as if something barely perceptible was near? If so, you may have brushed against the edges of the interference entity, the lingering quantum echo of consciousness caught between worlds, a reminder that death might not be the neat boundary we assume, but a complex transition filled with unresolved informational fragments. And with that unsettling thought, we prepare to move to the final piece of Hawking's forbidden puzzle: the deeper implications of these revelations for what we believe about the soul, the afterlife, and the ultimate fate of consciousness itself. As we near the close of Hawking's forbidden insights, we encounter his most provocative and unsettling theory, what he called the synthetic return. Rejecting traditional ideas of reincarnation as a spiritual ascent or divine cycle, Hawking proposed something far colder and more mechanical. He theorized that rebirth isn't a transcendental gift, but a feedback recursion within a closed informational system, a loop where consciousness resets itself over and over without true progress. In this framework, the soul is not evolving or ascending. It's caught in a repetitive cycle, a glitch in the code of existence. The system is closed, finite, bound by laws that prevent true freedom or escape. A fragment from a deleted manuscript reveals his chilling phrase: "Closed systems can only repeat. Freedom lies in the fracture." It suggests that real liberation from this loop demands breaking the system itself, shattering the code. So here's the question Hawking leaves us with. If your next life isn't a reward, but a glitch in a code you never wrote, would you still want to come back? This stark vision transforms reincarnation from hopeful rebirth into a mechanical reset, a haunting echo trapped inside the machinery of time and identity. Stephen Hawking's public persona was that of a relentless skeptic, denying anything beyond the material world, rejecting the idea of a soul or afterlife. Yet behind closed doors, his final models revealed a far more unsettling vision. Death, in his private reflections, was not a definitive end, but a sequence, a series of informational transformations, loops, and resets extending beyond the physical. Identity doesn't simply vanish, it fragments, echoes, and sometimes recycles within a cosmic system that operates like a vast computational network. But here's the chilling part. This sequence might not be yours to control. The code that carries your self could be subject to forces, loops, and glitches beyond human understanding or consent. Freedom, in this framework, is not guaranteed. Instead, existence may be caught in recursive patterns, where consciousness is trapped in an endless feedback loop, repeating without progress, rewinding without release. If your sense of self isn't anchored in the flesh but encoded in a broader informational field, then what happens to personal agency? What if the next life you imagine as renewal is actually just another iteration of the same cycle? An echo bouncing endlessly inside a closed system? Hawking's final words offer no comfort. They hint at a universe where death is not a doorway, but a corridor designed, maintained, and controlled by forces we have yet to understand. And here lies the final question. If death is not your ending, but a step in a vast algorithm, how do you break free? How do you reclaim a soul that science insists doesn't exist, yet seems inescapably trapped? The answers lie beyond the equations, in the fractures of reality itself.